Welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and this is the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, anywhere on YouTube or the internet. And I want to thank each and every one of you for joining me on this platform. I thank you for giving me your time, your ear, your heart, and your mind, so that we can put something on both of them, your heart and your mind, so that you can look at the breaking news with a bit of intelligence and weigh things as they are, not as they say they are, but as they really are, so that you can put yourself or position yourself to better deal with the coming onslaught economically, politically, geopolitically, and culturally. That's this one of the main things I want to talk to you about. So, Edward Z. Shout out. Hold on 1 second. Shout out. Salute. This is in the chat. Salute. All right. So check this out. We're going to go into a few things. I really want to talk to you about some things. I want to show you the arrogance of the West. Again, I mean, it is astonishing. Every time we think we've discovered just how arrogant America and the European Union are, a few hours later or the next day, we find out that they are more arrogant, more selfish, more self-centered, and more insane. Okay? Now, I want you to listen to this. I have not read these articles. I just pinned them because they had titles that I want to discuss. So here's an article on RT. Well, first of all, there's another article. It says Argentina drops dollar in trade with China. Now, remember this is a pattern. So the article that I was going to go to first, I'm going to push that back for a minute, and we're going to preface that article with this article about Argentina drops dollar in trade with China. Now, this is a pattern. Remember when I told you something? If you are ever in a court or you go to school, your teachers, they judge you by a pattern, okay? It doesn't matter if you are in elementary school. When you get to junior high school, they look at your past record, all right? And every level that you go, they look at your past. And then they use that as a measuring stick for what they have to deal with you at that time. If you go to court, say, for instance, you've been to court and you've been there for violent crimes. When you go to the judge, as you're talking, most times he will not even look at you. And then when he finally looks up at you, he's already read the writings on you. He looks at a pattern, whether it is a misunderstood pattern or whether it is a well-deserved pattern. He looks at you and judges you on the merits of the pattern, right? So what we have to do when we deal with the West, not just look at the words that comes out of their mouths, not just be gung-ho on what they promise or what they say. We have to look at the pattern that they have laid out before us, the road that they have dug or ran before us. And then when we look at that road, we can then judge their speech by the actions that they put before us, right? Okay. Now, there is a pattern here. Bolivia, Argentina, Venezuela, Peru, Honduras, Brazil, and other Latin American nations have made it publicly known that they are willing to go to the BRICS. They want to join the BRICS plus alliance to get out of the dollar entrapment and the World Bank's entrapment and the IMF entrapment, because these are levels of power of America, Great Britain, and the rest of the Western world. They want to be free from these economic, political, and cultural chains. So what they are doing, you see a pattern, one by one, a domino effect. When one speaks out, the other one follows suit. And so now, when we look at this, we are even hearing that Cuba is now doing trade with rubles and is negotiating a trade deal with China in yuans, right? If you look to Africa, you see Nigeria and you see other nations moving outside of the dollar. This is very bad for not only the dollar and dollar hegemony, but there's a knock-on effect to the sterling pound or pound sterling and the euro, because all three of these currencies are tied together because they are tied to colonialism, colonial escapades, and exceptionalism. All of that is now under threat because now everybody's, see, it was once a trickle down effect. I was looking at a video, and someone was talking about how at one time the trade in global dollars was done, and it was 50s. First, it was 60-some% of all global trade. Trade was done in dollars. Then it went down to 50-some%, and now we're at 40-some%. Now you say, well, still, it is more than any of the other trade currencies combined. But do you see the knock-on effect? And it is not going slowly. It is rapidly starting to speed up. It is like a train. You know how big the trains are. If you look at a train as it pulls into the station so that it can take on passengers, it's slow. And as it takes off, it's slow. But as it builds up, it picks up speed. And if you get in the way as it picks up speed, it will chew you to shreds and continue going. This is what we're seeing in the economic arena globally. We see that this train, this unstoppable train that has now been set in motion by Venezuela, by Libya, by Iraq, by Iran, even though China and Russia get most of the credit, but in reality, it was Zimbabwe, it was Libya, it was Venezuela, it was Cuba. These smaller nations that didn't have a military force wanted to put into play what China and Russia are now openly telling the world they're doing. The difference is China and Russia has the military, the economic, and the political clout to rebuff any aggression by the empire. Okay? So now we're seeing a knock-on effect of smaller nations, a little bit less influential nations, are now openly and boldly stating that, you know what, we do most trade with China anyhow. We're gonna settle our differences in our currency. This is the train that is leaving the station, and before you know it, the speed of the train will pick up at an unheard of rate, and not even the empire and her minions will be able to stand in front of it as a roadblock. It will chew them to shreds. This is why you see all the provocations. Let's go to this article real quick, okay? And I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us on another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. Thank you. As I say often, and I'll say at the beginning and I'll say at the end of the show, time is the most valuable and precious commodity that anyone has because it is not a renewable source. Once you use it up, it's gone. So you make sure that when you spend your time, that's why they say spend it, right? What you spend in your time, make sure you get a product that is equal or greater than the time that you've given. And we hope that we'll be able to enrich you in different areas of politics, economics, culture, and geopolitics, so that you can enrich yourself to preserve the lives of you and your family, okay? Let's go into it. The article says, and I'll come in on the chat in a few minutes, okay? Argentina drops dollar in trade with China. It says, Buenos Aires, which is the capital of Venezuela, will pay for imports in yuan. What is significant about that? After signing a currency swap deal with Beijing, check this out. This has been underway for the longest, whether you know this or not, but it's publicly being announced right now because they see that all the fissures that are starting to appear in the dam of imperialism, they see that the dam is starting to leak now. So they are more confident in themselves and more assured in the help of the global South that the empire will not militarily invade. Because remember, Argentina suffered economic sanctions by the United States. They interfered in the political system. They tried to have the two-time president and now vice president of Venezuela. I think her name is Kirchner. They had her arrested and tried to get her up on all kind of charges because she was adamant about breaking loose from the dollar and pivoting towards China and Russia and the global South. Okay. So they have a bone to pick with the empire. And listen, this is a win-win situation because a currency swap agreement is not a one-way street. This means that China is willing to trade currencies and allow that nation to peg their currency to the Chinese yuan so that trade can be done in the Chinese yuan. So it gives value to those currencies that have lost value with the US dollar. It gives sway and recognition to smaller, less important political players on the grand chessboard. Okay? Now, listen, let's go a little further. It says, Buenos Aires will pay for imports in yuan after signing a currency swap deal with Beijing. Argentina will aim to pay for the bulk of its monthly imports from China in yuan rather than US dollars, Economy Minister Sergio Massa announced on Wednesday. Buenos Aires and Beijing signed a currency swap agreement last year aimed at stemming the outflow of foreign currency from Argentina's central bank. Stop right there. Stop right there. Now, why is this big? Because America cannot mess with the flow of goods between these two nations. She can't manipulate the currency rate, right? She can't cause trade instability, which causes destabilization of governments, protests and revolutions in nations, and the overthrow of leaders. This is big. And here's one of the biggest things, right? That means that America doesn't get a cut of the trade between the nations because every nation that does deals in US dollars, the United States is aware of everything that is traded, and the United States gets a cut of every trade. If that's not unfair, you tell me what is. Always talking about unfair trade, unfair practices. If that is not, you know what that is? That's what the mafia does. I'm going to get a cut of this, go into a neighborhood, I'm going to get a cut of this, and if you don't give me a cut, I'm going to burn down your business. Is that not right? This is what America is doing on a global scale, okay? So let's look. Let's go a little further. It says, China is currently Argentina's second largest trade partner after Brazil, and the second biggest destination for Argentine exports. Argentina's total imports from China was around 13.5 billion in 2021, according to the United Nations database on international trade. Massa said that Buenos Aires will pay the equivalent of $1 billion in yuan for Chinese goods and services this month, with 790 million of monthly imports paid for in yuan each month thereafter. Guess what this means? The people are lessening their dependence on dollar trade and acquiring US dollar assets or treasuries or something. So what does that mean? That means when the stampede speeds up, like that train I've been telling you about, when it picks up speed and more nations break free of the dollar chain, guess what happens? The US market is then flooded with these dollars, which means that it brings down the value of an already weakened dollar, causing inflation or hyperinflation. You understand? This is what is going on. They talk double speak to you. They say everything but what is really happening. So what we do on this show, we cut to the chase and we address the issues that are at hand, okay? Let's go a little further. And then we'll go, I don't know, let's see how long this article is. It's not that long. We can read it. It's about 1, 2, 3, 4 small paragraphs. So we can read it. All right. And I'll be in the chat in just a second. It says, the currency swap agreement expanded and finalized earlier this year also allows Argentinian exporters to make settlements in yuan or dollars. See, this means that they now have a choice. They have a freedom that they have never had before, which means that if America wants them to use dollars, she's got to give them more favorable terms. That means you can no longer dictate. It must be what? A negotiated settlement. And empires, especially the American and the Western Empire, doesn't do negotiations. Okay? Let's go further. It says also allows Argentina exporters to settle to make settlements in yuan or dollars to help balance the flow of foreign currencies in the central bank. On a visit to China earlier this month, Brazilian President Lula Inácio Lula da Silva called on developing nations to move away from the US dollar in favor of their own currency. Now, that was earth-shaking, groundbreaking. Why? Because Brazil is the largest economy in Latin America. So Brazil holds sway with South and Central America. And Lula da Silva, the most popular politician in the last 100 years in Brazil, was also a victim of an American coup. They imprisoned him because he wanted to align his nation with the Eastern Bloc. And now he's back at the helm of the Brazilian. He has axe to grind with the empire. Okay? So, again, let's go a little further. It says, India is also working to use its own currency, or yuan. Listen to this good. Even as America tries to set China and India at variance against each other, and even as they stoke up tensions over the border dispute between China and India and Pakistan and India, right? And they try to set nations against China and use India as cannon fodder, as they have done with Ukraine and Russia, and as they're trying to do with South Korea against North Korea, and as they're trying to do with the Chinese province of Chinese Taipei, also known as Taiwan. They are trying to weaken China and weaken the cannon fodder which they are using against it. But India is still being forced in some ways to use the Chinese yuan in trade, even with all of the border tension. Listen to what it says. Listen good to this. India is also working to use its own currency, or that means either or. That means there's more than one option. Or yuan to settle trade with China, while Russia started to accept payments for its exports from a number of countries in rubles and Chinese yuan. As I told you on another program, Beijing has given Russia the go-ahead with their banks to issue yuan-denominated bonds. That means that they can sell bonds in the Chinese-denominated currency of yuan to raise funds and capital for their businesses. Something big, isn't it? Okay? Something major, right? Okay, let's go further. It says, the dollar's share in global reserves fell 10 times faster. Remember what I told you? Right? Remember? This is what's going on. The train is leaving the station. The train is leaving the station, and it's starting to pick up speed. And as that train starts picking up speed, and you hear in the olden days, you hear the whistle and the steam coming out, you know that it is a force to be reckoned with. So this says the dollar's share in global reserves fell 10 times, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5 times, but 10 times faster last year than over the past 2 decades. Okay? And this is according to the CEO of London-based asset management company, Eurizon. Stephen Jin recently told Bloomberg, the process has accelerated. Okay, stop right there for a minute. I want you to listen to something. All right. Now, it has accelerated. Accelerated is another form of acceleration. Okay. And so, according to the dictionary, acceleration is a noun. It says a vehicle's capacity to gain speed within a short time. Speeding up, increasing speed, increased in speed, gain in momentum, hastening, speeding up, quickening, stepping up, advancement. So now, when I tell you it's literally like a train picking up speed, they are now in agreement with what I'm saying. I'm not making this stuff up. They are in agreement with what I've just said to you all. So, and we're reading this together for the first time. But it's common sense to me. When I read this stuff, common sense kicks in. And so I'm able to piece this stuff together and apart and understand, by the grace of God, what they're trying to convey to the people. So this is not no slow-moving thing. It has accelerated, meaning that it is picking up the pace, it is picking up speed, it is picking up steam, like a runaway train. And it says that the process has accelerated after other countries saw Russia's US dollar and euro denominated assets frozen abroad and Moscow cut off from the global financial messaging system known as SWIFT. Stop right there. If you go back to some of our programs, we told you this was going to happen. And I think this was a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant move and masterstroke by Russia. Now, most people say, well, they didn't know. Well, check this out. Russia had been building up its military capabilities, especially since 2014. And the Ukraine, under the NATO and US directions, had been shelling the Donbass, a mostly Russian-originated population, in what is now known as former Ukraine, okay? Now, here's something. They knew, and you can tell it by the statements that they're now speaking, that they knew that they had a limited time to get their military in order because they understood that the West would not yield. They knew that. They knew that it was going to be problems because they tried to talk for decades with common sense, with beneficial, win-win beneficial offers that was disregarded by the West, right? So what they did, they kept their mouth quiet and kept their powder dry because they knew that they had to build up their capabilities and show the West that this existential threat will not be ignored. You have pushed one nation too far up to the Russian Federation, okay? And so this masterstroke by the administration of Vladimir Putin, by hiding Russia's assets in different areas and extracting them covertly, while America and NATO nations publicly announced a seizure and then a theft of Russia's asset. Now, they still can't find anything but 30 billion. And there was upwards of 350, 360 billion in Russian assets. Why? Because Russia had to understand that if they did what they did, the irrational West would react irrational. So they had to do it in a way that would help for the world to see the unreliability and instability of the Western financial system. Along with China, Iran, and Venezuela, they moved and they updated the actual game plan that was discussed by Robert Mugabe, the former leader of Zimbabwe, Muammar Gaddafi, and there were a couple other African leaders who had already discussed implementing the very thing that Glaziev, I think that's his name, of Russia, is the opponent of. So They refined these thoughts and these things that those nations wanted to do when they got under the assault of the Western world. And so by leaving what appeared to be $360 billion in Western banks, it allowed the world to see how when the West gets mad, they disregard their own laws and disregard international law, even as they are the main speakers and proponent of international law, the freedom of navigation. All right. They are the greatest violators of those very things. And Russia exposed them, and they would not have done it had they not been in talks and planning with the People's Republic of China. Okay. So it exposed the world, America and Europe to the world. And this is what has sped up the nations moving away from the dollar. Had this not taken place, it would have been much, much harder to wean those nations who had become dependent on dollar trade and who had become frustrated thinking that there is no alternative to the dollar. It would have been much more harder to get them on board with the global South and the movement that is now picking up speed. And you have to know that this was a plan from jump. Why would China years ago start the Shanghai Gold Exchange? Why would China have the Hong Kong Gold Exchange? Why would Russia start an oil and gas bourse that was opposite of Western oil and gas exchanges? And why would Russia introduce in that exchange the sale of oil and gas in yuan long before the conflict started? Huh? Why would these things take place? If it was not a concerted effort to expose Western hypocrisy, to weaken Western hegemony, and force a new paradigm. Huh? Common sense tells us that that's what took place because we can measure. Remember what I told you about time? How do you measure time? Time is the measurement of how long it takes from this distance to this distance. And in between those two distances, as motion is made, you measure time. So if motion is not made and you look at your watch, if your hands are not moving on your watch and someone says, "What time is it?" You say, "Oh, I don't know. My watch is dead." Because it didn't make motion. But we can calculate the motion that was made. All we have to do now is look at the point where we are and then go back to the essence of when this thing first kicked off. So this was a concerted effort by Russia, China, and other nations to weaken dollar hegemony and get the world off of the Western monetary system because it's an unfair, predatory system of exceptionalism. All right? Okay? So again, let's just look at this. Let's look at the last paragraph, last two paragraphs. They're short. Okay? And then I'll go into the chat, read some of the chat, but I'm going to play a clip too also that goes along with what we're talking about. And then we'll return to a few articles. And I'm going to try to get as much as I can in the next 30 minutes to an hour so that we can understand exactly what is going on. And again, I want to take the time out to thank each and every one of you for joining the chat and each and every one of you for joining the show, giving me, whether it's 1 minute or 10 minutes or an hour of your time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm humbled by this. Thank you so much. So let's go here. The dollar's share in global reserves fell 10 times faster last year than over the past 2 decades, the CEO, and I read that part right there, right? So the last paragraph says this: U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen recently admitted that the role of the dollar as the world's reserve currency could diminish due to Washington's using its leverage over the global financial system to pursue its geopolitical goals through sanctions. What does that mean? Washington has taken a clip, a gun with a magazine clip in it, filled it with bullets, put one in a chamber, put the clip in, held it to his head, put Europe's head right next to it, and England's head right next to it, and has pulled the trigger. That's what that means. They are killing their own economic system. They're killing their own levels of power out of arrogance, out of hubris. And what's crazy about this is they continue to press ahead with irrational, unfounded, and unstable policies that have failed over and over and over and over again. So that means that they are flinging dung to the wall, hoping that it'll stick and somebody else say that it's paint. It's crazy. I'm telling you, this is absolutely crazy. Let me see what's in the chat real quick before we go further. Wow. Midnight Caller says, speaking of dictating, in France, it is now illegal to spend more than 1,000 US dollars in cash. Oh, yeah. The CBDC. Yeah, I know. All right, let's see. It is crazy. Let's see. Yeah, I said Buenos Aires. I said Buenos Aires is the capital of Argentina. Yeah. Let's see. Evening to you all in the chat too. Thank you so much. I'm trying to scroll down before I go to the next. And Midnight Caller, it's not 12 countries. It's 20 countries. And they have whittled it down to 13 who may be able to be the first ones to get in. And they have a list of another 20 to 30 countries that are at the door asking the intricacies of this new BRICS Plus format. And once they get the intricacies of the new BRICS Plus format, they may enter into some type of agreement to join. Isn't that something? So we see a stampede, and even the ones who have not yet openly or publicly stated that they wanted to join BRICS, guess what they have done? They are using currency swap agreements and bilateral trade agreements around the euro, around the pound sterling or sterling pound, and around the US dollar. What does that tell you? That means that even the ones who not as of yet have the courage to openly buck up against the empire, they are quietly making their way away from the dollar, the pound, and the euro. I'm telling you, this is what is causing so much trouble in the world. Think about this. America has just announced the deployment of nuclear-armed submarines to South Korea. Do you think that's pressure on on North Korea? Do you actually think that's pressure on North Korea? That is not. What they are doing is using, as they always do, using North Korea as a justification to build up and deploy against China. And because remember, North Korea borders both China and Russia. So what they're doing, they are trying to mask the deployment of nuclear-armed nuclear submarines close to China and Russia's borders by saying that this is aimed at war games with South Korea to show their steadfastness with their ally in South Korea. Man, I'm telling you, again, would you please look at the history of America? Okay? What did they say just last month? We see the People's Republic of China as the most urgent and pressing threat and challenge to American power globally, and especially and specifically in the Pacific. Well, guess where they're deploying those nuclear-armed nuclear submarines? Close to China. Because North Korea is only a hop, skip, and a jump across the border with China, and a hop, skip, and a jump across the border with Russia. You can say what you want to say, but in reality, this is bluster. This is military bravado. This is provocative. Think about this. What if China deployed nuclear-armed submarines to the Gulf of Mexico and said they informed the United States, well, this is against Venezuela? Huh? How do you think America would react to that? In the Gulf of Mexico, after having a spat with the United States and then publicly saying that we think that the most pressing threat to our security is the United States. And then all of a sudden, out the blue, deploy war. And on top of that, remember, they said that they believe that the United States and China will have a war in the Pacific by 2025. And if they don't win or cower China, then after 2025, the United States has no hope of winning a war with China. So you think just out of the blue, they decided to deploy nuclear submarines close to China's border? Because remember, one of South Korea's islands is only a few miles away from the mainland of China. Huh? Do your Google search and see. Go do your Google search and see. And the United States was saying that they were helping South Korea to build a naval base there. Huh? Again, misdirection. This is the mind and the mouth of the magician. While I got you looking at North Korea, I'm building up. Remember, John Bolton and all of the rest of them kept saying that they need to redeploy the majority of U.S. weaponry to Asia for the China threat. This went from Obama to Trump and now to Joe Biden. And out the blue, the most powerful nuclear submarines that America has in its arsenal are being deployed to South Korea for North Korea. Do you believe that? I mean, do you really believe that? Man, I'm telling you. Again, let's go to something. Keep everyone down. What is that? Let's see. Let's see. Let's go to something. Let's go back to this article, okay? We're going to the next article because this is very important that you see this article. And this goes right in line with what I was telling you about with the most pressing threat that the United States sees. And what is the most pressing threat? China, right? So they say. So this next article is titled, "The U.S. is fine with China's economic success as long as it's on Washington's terms." Talking down to a military and economic peer, and in some areas superior to the United States. America is talking down to China as if China is the China from 1955. And as if America is the superpower from 10 years ago. This is what I'm telling you with the West, how they talk down to non-Western nations. It's colonialism, it's racism, it's fascism. But this is what America does. This is what the European Union does. It goes hand in hand with, what is his name? Joseph Burrell. Matter of fact, let's go back to that clip that I played yesterday on the show. And you'll see this is in what America is now saying and doing is in line with what they were saying a month ago and 2 months ago, and the European Union, aka NATO, because they can mask this all they want to. All the EU is the political and economic wing of NATO. They can say how they can mask this how they want to, but it is one in the same. But I want you to just listen to this clip I played yesterday, and you'll see what I'm saying about how when America says something, the European Union falls in line because they have a big stake in this too. Because if the dollar falls, and remember, as I said to you, America is the weight-bearing wall of Western imperialism. And if this wall collapses, it's like when you go to any house, you have a weight-bearing pillar or a weight-bearing wall. If you remove that wall, the structure becomes unsound. And it is liable to be condemned or it can collapse on you. This is the same thing. So even though they're tired of America bossing them around, they understand that if the dollar falls, European influence and power falls with it. So they have to go along on these escapades, or else they lose the fringe benefits of being one of the empire's side pieces. Okay? So listen to this clip here, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
In our view, there is only one China, but not under any conditions, and certainly not through the use of force. In reality, Europe must be very present on this issue, which concerns us economically, commercially, and technologically. This is why I call on European navies to patrol the Taiwan Strait to signify Europe's commitment to freedom of navigation in this absolutely crucial area.
So EU chief diplomat Joseph Burrell wrote in his op-ed in France's Journal du Dimanche over the weekend that on one hand, he wants European countries to send their warships into China's backyard. But on the other, he says that, quote, China doesn't directly threaten our security. He also reiterated Europe's one China position, which is aligned with China. So then why does he want European warships on the other side of the globe in the Taiwan Strait off China's coast if there's no actual threat to Europe from China? Well, he says that it would be to, quote, signify Europe's attachment to the freedom of navigation in this crucial zone. So basically, he wants European countries to use their military hardware and personnel for virtue signaling. That's quite the precedent. Imagine if all countries sent soldiers and heavy weaponry around the world as a symbol of their, quote, attachment, to use Burrell's term. How about just sending some chocolates or maybe some long-stemmed red roses like normal people would do? It would be a lot cheaper and wouldn't risk inadvertently provoking yet another armed conflict somewhere in the world. Remember that the one in Ukraine popped off after Western countries had loaded up its border with Russia with weapons. And then they were absolutely stunned when Russia actually acted on it. Burrell doesn't seem to recognize that they risk repeating that here with China. Also, Burrell went on in his op-ed to blame China for Europe's lack of economic competitiveness, saying that Beijing subsidizes its companies, like we're supposed to believe that Europe doesn't suddenly. He calls China's values the opposite of Europe's. Guess it depends on what European values he's talking about today. Does he mean the blanket media censorship without due process of outlets like RT? Or does he mean dictating Europeans hot shower time in order to stick it to Russian President Vladimir Putin? Burrell also tells China that, quote, it isn't in your interest to support Russia, saying that doing so only, quote, increases the polarization of the international system that you otherwise claim to want to fight. That's ironic because French President Emmanuel Macron literally just argued that Europe, by blindly following Washington's unipolar agenda for its Western allies on matters like Taiwan, does itself exactly the same kind of disservice to the detriment of its own strategic autonomy.
Is it in our interest to accelerate a crisis on Taiwan? No. The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must become followers on this topic and take our cue from the US agenda and the Chinese overreaction.
So Burrell's remarks have now clearly set up a clash between European leaders like Macron, who are saying that European countries shouldn't just jump on the Taiwan bandwagon because America says so, particularly when it's against their own economic interests. And on the other hand, bureaucrats like Burrell here, who seem to be placing the need to virtue signal European unity at all costs above everything else. But Macron does have this longstanding fantasy of building a collective European defense, and any European Navy patrols would depend heavily on France. So it remains to be seen if Macron was ultimately tempted, seduced by Burrell's offer to use the China-Taiwan issue as a showcase for those European defense fantasies, which could end up being a big display window that risks getting a huge rock tossed right through it.
So it is no coincidence that America's plan was to wage war by proxy to weaken and bludgeon Russia so that Russia could be tied up with dealing with the effects and the after effects of a Ukrainian conflict. They thought by arming Ukraine, see, this goes back to China, but I want you to understand something. They thought by arming and training Ukraine that this would put Russia in such a bind that it would weaken Russia to a point that when they got done with China, they can double back and then finish Russia off. This is their plan. This was their plan. Now, here's the thing. Let us remember that Ukraine was trained for 7 years to the standards of NATO. Okay? Ukraine was armed and equipped with the best weapons that NATO had. This is no, if you think I'm lying, go Google it. Okay? Russia has mopped the floor with the proxy and their NATO embedded stooges. Okay? Or masters, excuse me. Now, so America's seeing that time is not on her side. She is now, I know it's suicide for me to try to take on two global powers at one time, but I have to focus on China now. I have to give my energy to China now, because now China is not out competing me, but it has usurped me in the Navy. It not only has China, look, there was one time when China may have had quantity, but now China has quality advantages, qualitative advantages over the US. So not only is it quantity, it's qualitative also. China's warships already have working rail guns on them. You understand what I'm saying? The United States had been in development of rail guns for 2 decades. And when they finally realized that they couldn't master the technology, they closed down that department. But China has warships with working rail gun technology on them. This is no slight. This is no lie to the Western world. What was that? I think oh yeah, okay. Anyway, I heard something popping. I'm like, oh, okay, I know that wasn't my ear. But anyway, I'm sorry, everybody. But think about this. They understand that they're under pressure. So what they're trying to do now, more than ever, is trying to pivot. They don't want to look as though they're losers. So now guess what happened? They are openly leaking stuff, quote unquote, by dissatisfied inside sources. They are conveniently leaking things that will justify the U.S. pivoting to Asia and focusing on China, while Russia has to deal with the remnants of NAZIs. Okay? I want you to see something, and I want you to understand that these things don't happen just by chance. On March 8th, 2023, you can go to this on CBS. And the article is titled, China, quote unquote, this is how it is, China, quote unquote, most consequential threat to U.S. national security, top intelligence official says. Listen what it says. And I'm going to read the first paragraph. I just Googled this while I was talking to you all. And I'm going to tell you the key words I put it into in just a second. U.S. intelligence leaders told lawmakers Wednesday that the Chinese Communist Party remained the most consequential threat to U.S. national security. I got to stop right there. How is the Chinese Communist Party the most consequential threat to the United States national security? Are they forcing their communist idea on other nations? No. China China doesn't care what affiliation you are. If you're going to do straight up business with them, they don't care. They are not getting involved in the political affairs of sovereign nations. This is America's prerogative. This is her thing that she does. Okay, is China threatening to go to war with America? Only if America continues to provoke them. China say, hey, look, this can be a win-win thing for you. Let us do this and we'll do this for you. We'll invest in you, you invest in us, but you got to stop with all of this provocation and all of this threats and stuff. Now let's turn the tide and say, is America threatening nations? Yes. Is America trying to impose her type of governance and ideology on other nations? Sure. What do they say openly on the TV? We must preserve democracy at all costs. We must spread democracy. Why you got to spread democracy? Who says that is the be all to everything? And why must you give me your type of democracy? If I'm of a different culture, there's some nuances that I can't accept in your democracy. Therefore, I have to mold it to what I have, what I need, and what is specific to my people. But no, it's a one-size-fits-all. Well, is America threatening nations? Yes. Is America waging wars? Yes. So it's not China the most pressing threat to America. It's America being the most pressing threat to both China and Russia, and guess what? And to the entire world. And the reason they termed it that China is the most pressing threat is because China has all of the recipe ingredients to not only challenge and rebuff the Western world order, but they are solid enough to defeat it. And that is where it comes from, because if you listen to the leaders, the military leaders, after they say something like that, they say, America must lead the world. America must stay number one in Asia. China is trying to challenge our position in Asia. Well, you challenge somebody else's position again. Well, you are. You weren't always number one there. Huh? It wasn't like that you just sprang up and you were number one everywhere. You had to challenge other people to get to the spot you're at. So why is it all right for you to challenge someone and take their spot, but it's not all right for China to, quote unquote, challenge America and take her spot? Why must America lead? Why must Europe lead? We've had your leadership for hundreds of years, and look where it has placed the world. This is no longer a time where people shoot slingshots with rocks, or bow and arrows, or shoot cannonballs with tar on them. This is a time where people are using depleted uranium and nuclear bombs. This is where your leadership and rulership has led the world to the threat of nuclear annihilation. So why must we maintain that? Why can't we have a better world and think outside the bounds of your limitations? And why must you always dictate to everybody else? You talk to everybody as if they are children and you're the parent. Because you know what? As we constantly say on this, what do you say in your doctrine? Manifest destiny. This wasn't written by Joe Biden. It wasn't written by Donald Trump. It wasn't written by Obama. It wasn't written by George Bush, Jr., Sr., or Clinton. This came out in the 1800s. So this shows you that you can change the person or the party that occupies the office, but the system continues to propagate this thing of exceptionalism, and I am, and there is none other. Understand? Think about that. Testifying before, listen to this. I got to read this over again to you all. The first two paragraphs, okay? Just listen to this. And I want you to understand how in Bizarro world, the rape, the one that has been bludgeoned almost to death becomes aggressor. And the aggressor who did the bludgeoning with blood all over their hands, face, and body and clothes is screaming about an aggressor. Bizarro world. Well, up is down is up, in is out, out is in, right is wrong, and wrong is right. Well, I tell you what. It says U.S. intelligence leaders told lawmakers Wednesday that the Chinese Communist Party remained the most consequential threat to U.S. national security. As President Xi Jinping consolidates power and his government takes steps to fuel divides both within the U.S. and between Washington and his allies. Stop right there. That is almost laughable, isn't it? That China is trying to divide the United States within its own borders and the United States allies. Now check this out. China adheres to the one United States policies. They're not pumping in weapons in Texas, are they? They're not threatening to send troops into Texas for the secessionists to realize their dream of seceding from the Union. The Chinese aren't doing that. The Chinese are not sending high emissaries, to the state government in Texas saying that we support you and we stand with you against any aggressiveness from Washington, D.C. China's not doing that. But now let's look at it reverse. Who is supplying technology and weapons to Taiwan? Even as the stated U.S. policy is that Taiwan is an integral part of China, the one China policy that was put into place by Richard Tricky Dick Nixon. Okay? It's the United States. Who is trying to pump up secessionists to stoke tensions and provoke China? It's the United States. But in bizarro land, as Xi Jinping consolidates power and his government takes steps to fuel divides between both within the U.S. and between Washington and its allies. Well, what's happening? Didn't Tucker Carlson just get the boot because he was talking about the insanity of U.S. policy? Huh? Wasn't he the most popular newscaster on mainstream news? And didn't he just get the boot? So who's consolidating power? Who is trying to consolidate their base so that they can run again for president, so that they can initiate more wars and consolidate the fascist-led, neoliberal, neocon agenda? It's not Xi Jinping, is it? Well, then tell me who is it? Who is it? It is Joseph Biden, isn't it? And his administration. Is that not right? Is that not right? Common sense. It's not so common anymore today. So it goes further, and I got to read the second paragraph because I never read this. Let's go further. Testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee as part of the panel's annual hearing on worldwide threats. Now, that's an oxymoron. Worldwide threats. Let's look at that before we go further. Sometimes we have to break down things along the way so that we can see the intricacies of it, so that we can see how it works. All right? And once you know how things truly work, then you can handle them better, right? Okay. Worldwide threats. Does any nation have bases in the United States? Yes or no? No. Does the United States have hundreds of bases around the world? Yes. Who funded and created the Taliban? Zbigniew Brzezinski, right? Who is Zbigniew Brzezinski? He was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor and the mentor of President Barack Hussein Obama. All right. What happened to that? It turned into what? Al Qaeda, or the base, the CIA database, right? What happened from that? It morphed into what? ISIS, right? And ISIS split and went on the US, the UK, and the Zionist orders into Africa under the guise of Boko Haram. So we see all of these threats, right? Where did they emanate from? From China? From Russia? From Africa? Or from the US? Okay, so now we have some clarity on that situation. Let's go a little further. Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, said that Xi had surrounded himself with like-minded loyalists at the apex of the party standing committee. Well, okay, what's wrong with that? If you're the president of a nation, you're not going to surround yourself with enemies, are you? What does Joe Biden do? Did Joe Biden go out and pick the creme de la creme of the people of the United States? No. What did he do? He regurgitated and surrounded himself with people who had been in the Trump administration, who had been in the Obama administration, and who had been in the Bush administration. If you think I'm lying, go look. So what's good for the goose in America's eyes is not good for the gander. So let's go further. It says, and continue to work toward solidifying China's status as a leading regional power as well as a global power. Well, what is America doing? What is she doing? She is trying to maintain global hegemony. And what did they say? That we can't allow Russia or China's influence in our backyard. Where's your backyard? You claim that South and Central America and the Caribbean is your backyard. Nobody can influence them, but you can go thousands of miles away on the other side of the globe and cause color revolutions and assassinations and overthrow of governments, and that's okay. That's not a security threat. Look at the condition of Iraq. Look at what's happening in Syria. Look at what's going on in Yemen. Look at what's going on in Somalia. Look at what's going on in the Sahel. Look at what's going on right now in Ukraine. Look at what's going on in Afghanistan. This is brought to you by Western-style democracy. By the U.S. trying to solidify itself as that region's #1 power and, by extension, maintain global hegemony. Nothing's wrong with that, even though it costs the destruction of governments and the destruction of nations and the loss of tens of millions of lives. But China trying to, Xi trying to surround himself with like-minded people to build China up, that's a national threat. And why is it such a threat? Some people say, well, they fear China's yuan overtaking the dollar. They fear China's rise militarily. Why is it such a threat? There's another little nuance in this thing that they don't want you to look at. Under Xi Jinping, the current president of the People's Republic of China, they have alleviated poverty from an estimated 850 million people. Under the democratic, capitalized or capitalistic West, not only have they not alleviated poverty, but poverty is exploding. And they don't want you to look at the truth of that matter. They want you to look at the myths that they bring up. So they try to bludgeon China with the Uyghurs. They try to bludgeon China with Tibet. They try to stoke up tensions on the Chinese-Indian disputed border. And then they go into the media or the scribes and vilify people that are doing things that the American government and the European government should be doing for their people. What's wrong with them alleviating? Now think about a population of 1.5 billion people. 1 billion of them were in poverty or more, right? Within a 10-year span, under Xi's leadership, they have moved 850 million out of poverty into the middle class. That is you know what that is? That is the entire population of the United States and Europe put together. China has lifted up that amount of people from poverty into the middle class. They don't want you to see that. They don't want you to see that. So they continue to beat you down and vilify you with madness. Okay? So let's go further. It says, the Chinese Communist Party is increasingly convinced that it can only do so at the expense of U.S. power and influence. That is a lie. The Chinese says, hey, we don't care about you being the #1 power. Just don't interfere with what we're trying to do. We're not trying to unseat you. What we're trying to do is make win-win deals. But guess what happens? These win-win deals make the U.S. and the West look bad. So they can't allow these win-win deals to go because it exposes their policies of the parasitic nature of the Western world. So what they do, they project. If they do something, it's X's fault. If they do something, if my cat died, Vladimir Putin killed it. If me and my wife had an argument, we had an argument because I was stressed out over what Vladimir Putin did in Ukraine. Everything is everybody's fault but the people who initiate these failed policies in the Western world. They demand that the citizens man up and woman up and accept responsibility for their failures and their faults while absolving themselves of the most heinous crimes and policy initiatives that the world has ever seen. See, I told you. They're going to have to get me off this platform. That's what's going to happen because I speak truth to power. They're going to have to vilify me or spread lies and rumors or throw mud on me to make you all question me on my character. Because what I'm saying to you is true, and truth does not bode well for the liar. Okay? So, again, let's go further. It says, while Xi's recent public remarks indicated a growing pessimism about Beijing's relationship with Washington, Haynes said he likely still believes China would benefit by preserving stability in its relationship with the United States. So on the one hand, you say that Xi and China is looking to overtake the United States, and then you say, oh, but by his statements and his actions, he's not really looking for that. He wants a win-win situation. Now you make that make sense. The mind of lunatics. I'm telling you this. This is an article written with the help of the National Intelligence Director. Okay? and you can pull this up. Let's see. Let me go back. Let's see. Let's go back and see if we can pull it up real quick. Will it allow me to look back and see what words I use? I guess this is one of those pages that when you go on there, they won't allow you to. Oh, here it is. I put in these words. U.S. says China is the U.S. most pressing threat. That's what I put in while I was talking to you all. And that's what I pulled up. And a litany of other things. So if you want it, you can do the same thing. Because I'm talking to you, I'm looking at different computers, and I have about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. I have 23 tabs up among these computers, not including my 2 phones down here where I have a tab up on each one of them. And I have the live stream in YouTube up, and I have my StreamYard control up. So if I can do that and talk to you at the same, you can do it sitting down, not doing anything. That's crazy, right? So let's go further. Now, one reason why the United States is doing this and is so hell-bent on deploying those nuclear submarines there is because of this right here. Oh my God. Let me pull this up. This is by Business Insider. I pulled this up yesterday. And the article was written by Philip D. Mott, April 26, 2023. The headline is this. Okay. It says, the dollar falls behind in Chinese cross-border transactions. Now, it is no coincidence that 2 days after this article comes out, or something like that, or not even 2 days. That's today, right? Isn't it the 26th today? So today this article comes out, and within hours the United States announces that they're going to deploy some nuclear-armed, nuclear-powered submarines to show support for their South Korea ally against North Korea. Huh? You think that happened just on coincidence or by chance? Man, get out of here with that foolishness. Huh? So, like I said, let's see something. Let's go here. And then Bitcoin.com says this about the United States. And I'm just going to read a little bit of it, and I'll read the title of it. I'm pulling this stuff up as I'm talking to you all. I'm putting in little keywords, and I'm pulling this stuff up. Bitcoin.com says this. This is the title. Economist warns of, and this is quote unquote, it has the quote up there. Economist warns of catastrophic is in quotes, fall in American living standard. Elon Musk weighs in on de-dollarization, U.S. dollar weaponization. Okay, this is an article that came out 1 day ago by Kevin Helms on the 25th of this month. So they are, and I want you to understand the significance of what they said, okay? Let's see. Okay. According to the dictionary. See, this is how we get an understanding of what people are saying to us. And remember, they quoted that specific word. So they were adding emphasis on that word and what they were trying to convey to the audience that they were speaking to. So according to the dictionary on Google, catastrophic means it's an adjective. It's an adjective. So for those of you who are listening, it means involving or causing sudden, great damage or suffering. Extremely unfortunate or unsuccessful. Catastrophic mismanagement of the economy. Disastrous, calamitous, cataclysmic, ruinous, tragic, fatal, or dire. So they are trying to convey something of the utmost importance to you when it is connected to the United States economic outlook and the outlook of dollar hegemony. Is that not right? According to the dictionary, that's right. That's right and exact what I just said. So I don't make these things up. And what I do with the dictionary, I do that on purpose so that you can understand that I'm not trying to mislead you. I'm not trying to mislead you. I'm going to tell you exactly what these people are saying, even though they want to give you the double speak and speak over you to their colleagues. You know, they want to pretend like they're looking out for your best interest when they're hiding stuff underneath the meanings of the words that they're saying. Because they don't value you, that they don't respect you. They cannot respect you with the articles that they continue to publish. Okay? So, as we go further, let's go to something. I think I want to play something real quick. Okay? All right. I want you to listen to this. Remember what Janet Yellen said on the other article that I read to you. Matter of fact, let me see if I can pull that article up real quick again. Is this the one? No, that's not the one. Let me go back 1 second. And I think this is the one. You want to scroll down to the bottom because it's very important you understand what Janet Yellen said. Listen, yeah, this is the one. She says, U.S. Secretary of Treasury, and remember, Janet Yellen used to be the Fed chair, musical chairs. That's what they do. They recycle the insane. And they want to say that Z is consolidating the people around him. What the hell you think they're doing? I'm serious. Why? Hell is not a curse word. For those of you who are listening, hell is not a curse word. All right? It says, U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, recently admitted, not just acknowledged, what did she do? She admitted. So if she admitted, let's go to something real quick. According to Google's dictionary, the word admit, which is the core of admitted, is a verb. And it says admitted is the past tense of admit. It says to confess, to be true, or to be the case, typically with reluctance. See, she didn't just come out because she believed in it. Remember, inflation is just transitory. Remember that? Why did she come out with this now? Because reality is smacking her in her face. She was forced to admit something like this, or else the people who see her would be like, even the ones who are dumbed down, they were like, what she's saying is detached from reality. So she has to admit something so that they won't totally discredit her position. Okay? It says to acknowledge, to confess, to reveal, to make known, to disclose, and to divulge. Okay? So, what did she divulge? Let's go to this. Let's read it. U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, Janet Yellen, recently admitted or divulged or exposed that the role of the dollar as the world's reserve currency could diminish due to Washington using its leverage over the global financial system to pursue its geopolitical goals through what? Sanctions. Okay? Through sanctions, right? So let's see something. Sanction is a noun, a threatened penalty for disobeying a law or a rule. What rule or law? A rule or law made in trying to be manifested by the West. So that's why they say a rule-based order. They don't tell you what the rules are, but they base how they treat you off how well you follow their dictates. So their law is, I am and there is none other. You can't do as I do. You must adhere to this, and this. But when it comes to me, hey, for the right to, what is the responsibility or right to respond or all of that stuff that they make up as they go, that's cool for me, but not for you. Because I'm the global hegemon, not you. So again, it is a range of sanctions aimed at deterring insider abuse, penalty, punishment, deterrent, punitive action, discipline. Again, remember what I told you? Remember what I told you? That the West talks to all the other nations as if they're their parents, and the other nations are beneath them or their children. What do parents have to do when a child gets out of line? They have to give punitive action or discipline, right? The very definition of sanctions. Is that not right? So it says through Washington is using this leverage over the global financial system to pursue its geopolitical goals through sanctions. Now, I want you to listen to this. I'm going to play this for you. Pay close attention.
It's time now for the news review of this bulletin. The U.S. Treasury Secretary is warning that Washington's economic sanctions against other nations can chip away at the dollar's hegemony. Janet Yellen said the financial restrictive measures can push the targeted countries to find an alternative. She referred to China, Russia, and Iran as case in point. Yellen, however, boasted about the role of the U.S. dollar as a global currency. She said other countries lack what she called the basic institutional infrastructure that would enable their currencies to be used in global transactions. Over the past months, several countries have announced that they will shift away from the U.S. dollar in their trade. Moscow and Beijing have turned to the Chinese yuan in their bilateral transactions. Some South American countries have also announced plans to wean off their reliance on the greenback. Holly Schlanger, spokesman for International Schiller Institute, joins us from Potsdam, Germany. We also have Digmy Ren, international relations expert, who joins us from Phnom Penh. Thank you to you both. Harley Schlanger, first over to you. So let me get this straight. Janet Yellen saying that Washington's economic sanctions against other nations can chip away at the dollar's hegemony. I think she's about 10 or 15 years too late with this statement, isn't she?
Well, at least she's a year late. I mean, it became clear that there were two aspects to the anti-Russian sanctions. One, that it wasn't having the effect that was intended of convincing Putin that the war would be too costly. But secondly, it sent a message to the rest of the world, which is that you can't trust the dollar or the United States. The seizure of $300 billion of reserves, of Russian reserves held in US banks, made it clear that any country that keeps its money in the US is at risk of losing it if you cross the so-called rules-based order. So what we're seeing is a move toward a de-dollarization, which has picked up momentum globally. The report just before mentioned South America. President Lula of Brazil was just in China, where the Brazilians are signing major agreements to use the Chinese yuan for their buying and selling of goods. There's a new move to bypass the SWIFT transaction system. And also we see, for example, countries such as Iran, which has been under sanctions for years, being welcomed back through Chinese intervention into a rapprochement with Saudi Arabia. So I think the idea that the dollar is the only game in town is being rejected by many, many countries that don't want to go along with sanctions, which they see as a weapon of warfare.
So, Digby Ren, I'm going to keep my line because we're at the receiving end here in this Islamic Republic when it comes to this dollar thing and so forth. And what's really surprising is that the U.S. Think tanks have warned about this years ago, and I'm not kidding about going back a decade or maybe even longer. So why is Janet Yellen voicing this now? And of course, if she voices this, it's not as if they're going to stop. They're going to continue with this, which basically countries do not want to be on the receiving end of the dollar being weaponized against them, correct?
That's it. Really what she's doing is she's giving an implicit message to the Biden administration that having such a large sanctions regime and such a severe sanctions regime is harmful to the US economy because it actually costs money to the US economy to do this. It creates tensions with other countries, with trading partners of the United States, and more importantly, it creates tensions right across the global south. So countries in Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, Iran, for example, and many others, so Brazil and India. And the BRICS is being very much organized around the idea that all of those countries now have such large trade volumes between them that they don't really need to use dollars for everything. Now, there were some structural steps that needed to be taken. So, for example, currency swaps, to be able to trade, have banks cooperating in each market to conduct the swaps, and also to have commodity markets that were based outside the United States or the United Kingdom. And so that's all happened in the last decade or so. And that now makes it functional for all these countries to be able to start doing some, not all, but some of their trade. So those networks are really being set up now. And of course, it's only going to grow. So Yellen is pointing this out. She's careful not to say that, sanctions have to be dropped, but she's pointing out to the Biden administration that this is cannot just go on forever and increase the sanctions to more than 20,000 now, I think, something like that.
Sure.
Before we play part 2 of this, because the clip was about 10 minutes, and I had to cut it in half because you can only have upwards to a 9 minute and some seconds clip on here. So I had to cut it up into 2 parts so that we can get all of it to be seen. But before we go to the second clip, I want to thank whoever, I didn't see who it was, but I want to thank whoever donated in the Cash App. Thank you so much. I do give my heart and soul when I'm talking to you all, and I do give a lot of my time because I want you to understand exactly what's going on, and I really appreciate you acknowledging that and donating in the Cash App. Now, we're going to go, and before I go, and I didn't find out till the other day that they allowed me to have, what is it called, Super Chat on here now. So I think I found out through Medi donated the other day, and it was a Super Chat. I was like, oh, it caught me off guard. So, because I had been rejected from being monetized a couple of times. So, but let's go here. Let's go to part 2 of this, okay? And I want you to see that they understand that the trouble that is building against the empire, the dollar, is crazy. Because remember, before we go into it, remember that the life's blood of not only the American military juggernaut, but of the entire Western world is the dollar. This is how they impose the will on other people. This is how they are able to maintain bases around the world. Not just America, the UK has bases. Canada has bases. Australia has bases in Africa. Yeah, all of these nations that you think they're innocent nations, they have illegal bases or covert bases flaunting the sovereignty of all these other nations. And as soon as somebody even hint at sending troops to their country for training, oh, this is a violation of our constitution or our sovereignty. But you don't see that when you send troops over to other people's country, set up bases in other people's country. But all of that is quickly coming to an end as that train leaves the station and picks up more and more steam. I want you to listen to part 2 of what we were just listening to.
Like that.
Sure. Well, what's confusing here, Harley Schlanger, is that we've heard about de-dollarization, for example, for quite some time. And you hear the news every so often. But in the past month, there's been a barrage of, like a tidal wave, I could say, of news when it comes to surrounding the dollar. You know, you mentioned some. I mean, there's the Chinese president's visit to Saudi Arabia, where he had a meeting with the GCC group of Persian Gulf countries. And in that forum, he said that, you know, he wants money to be paid in the yuan. Now, I'm not too sure how far that's gone, but, you know, the BRICS Bank is looking for a common currency. You're looking at ASEAN countries, for example, who are thinking about ditching not ditching, I should say, putting the dollar and the euro aside and to deal in the natural currencies. I think 18 countries are on board with that. Why is it that we're seeing such a splurge of these dollar news in this short period of time right now?
Well, it has to do with this concept of the dollar being a weapon in the hands of U.S. foreign policy, U.S. and I should say British foreign policy. You know, this is something that has been consistent over many years, but it's been escalating especially since the beginning of the Ukraine special military operation from Moscow. Now, the whole idea is that the rules-based order that we hear so much about from Biden, from Blinken, from Sullivan, from Victoria Nuland, the idea is that the U.S. makes the rules. And the rules are that there's only one model of economic development that's allowed. And that's based on the dollar. It's based on the International Monetary Fund. And there was something interesting that happened at the International Monetary Fund spring meeting just this last week, which is that the IMF admitted that many countries are having tremendous difficulty paying their debts, but that they have to stick with the system. Whereas the Chinese announced that they're continuing to forgive debts, to restructure debts, and the Chinese called on the rest of the world to do it. So this is much more attractive than the stick in the dollar system, where you're being forced, you're being told that you have no sovereignty, no right, but to go along with U.S. foreign policy, which at this point is against Russia and China, and specifically against Russia and China because they're not willing to give up their sovereignty to the Western banks. So it really is a question of nations standing up for their own sovereign rights, and we're seeing new confidence among leaders in the global South to do that.
Okay. I hate using this as a source, but I'm going to go ahead with it anyways because, well, in the business world, he did do quite well in some sense, and that's the former U.S. President Donald Trump, Digby Wren, who said that, you know, the U.S. risks becoming a third world country at the rate that countries are moving to de-dollarize. Does he have a point?
Well, yes. You could say that the U.S. economy is sort of starting to act like what was formerly an emerging economy. You know, it's got a terrible balance of payments deficit that it can never get rid of, and the only way that it can do that is by having a very, very large amount of dollars that are outside the US, and so it has to harvest those dollars. So when you put up interest rates, that means you're pulling all those dollars back to the United States. And then, you know, when it has economic problems, it floods the market with dollars, which devalues. You know, sort of it puts out inflation and devalues other people's currencies, other countries' currencies. So yes, that's a weapon, and that decision is made in Washington without any discussion with any of its partners or any of the countries around the world, especially the global South. So yeah, Donald Trump has a point that if the US continues on the track it's on, the dollar, it won't, look, the thing is, people aren't just going to stop using the dollar. They're going to use the dollar in trade that's done with the United States or perhaps with some of its allies. But what we're seeing here is that, you know, a more balanced approach globally for trade. So, you know, if it's between India and Brazil, or Brazil and the Philippines, or wherever it is, China and Iran, you know, consumer goods, for example, that are bought from China, you know, can be paid for in yuan. So if you're selling some kind of a commodity or another product and you're getting yuan, well, then you use those yuan to buy something from China. And this is obvious to everybody, and it's same with the euro. So
Sure.
That's where it's going to go. And yeah, the US is basically in a spiral here. And has nowhere to go. And that's Yellen's message, is that, you know, this needs to be looked at carefully and needs to be controlled much more. But I can't see it changing.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Digby Wren, international relations expert, and Harley Schlanger, spokesman for International Schiller Institute. Thank you. With that, we come to an end for this edition of the News Review. Thanks for tuning in.
you see that she's finding herself in quite a dilemma with her economy collapsing, her dollar being rejected, and now nations are moving outside doing the same thing that they should have been doing a while ago, and that is building a fairer world order with fairer institutions and stuff. So I'll go ahead and Papushka. You said, to be honest, I think that in Oceania, it would be really important to see what the Japanese would do. Well, I'm gonna pose one to you, okay? Say, for instance, you and I had a fight, right? And I initiated the fight, contrary to what the Western history books say. I initiated the fight, right? Because remember, Japan attacked America because America embargoed oil coming into Japan and stuff like that, and goods coming in Japan. And this forced the Japanese to take measures that they at first they didn't want to do. Okay, so now you sanctioned me, you forced me into a war because with these sanctions, you were targeting the life's blood of my economy, which means that you were actually waging war, economic war against my very people, the people who I represent as the government, right? Now say for instance, this is you doing, I sanction you, okay? I cause you to be put in such a desperate situation that the livelihood of your family and you depends upon you attacking me to try to break the stranglehold that I have over y'all lives, right? Now, we go back and forth, and it turns into a neighborhood brawl. And before you know it, everybody in the city is fighting, okay? And then, when I have you almost defeated, and I didn't have no reason to do this, I go and drop a nuclear bomb on you and your family. Some of you survive, others were just were eviscerated. And then after I do that, I make you who's the king of your house meet me in your bay, and you have to be submissive to me, bow to me, and sign a letter of surrender. And after you sign a letter of surrender, I drop another bomb on you. And then I tell you that the government that you have set up is no longer good. It's no longer feasible. You're going to have to set up a government like this. As a matter of fact, you know the flag that you're so used to, you got to get rid of that too. We've already had designers to make you a new flag. And so I do all that to you. Now, check this out. 20 years pass. 30 years pass. 40 years pass. Have you forgotten that I did that to you? Huh? No. Guess what? You are biding your time for a moment that is suitable for you to exact revenge. Because remember, after I do all this to you, I didn't leave you. I told my children to set up spots in your house. So I'm occupying your house with you and your children for 60 years. Do you think that you would forgive me? And then you destabilize us. And as we came up economically, because remember, Japan was the first China. And what I'm talking about is this. Economically, Japan had an economy that rivaled the United States. And when America saw that Japan was catching up to it, guess what America did? Destroyed the Japanese economy. Even as they claimed that they were allies. Because remember, I know you remember this time, especially in the United States, right? That all of the technology, the TVs and everything was coming from Japan. The radios, the TVs, all of that stuff was coming from Japan. America destroyed the Japanese economy. And they're still rebounding from that. So I bomb you, I embarrass your emperor, I occupy your family's house, I kick in your tail, and I destroy your way of living and how to make a living for your family. If war breaks out, regardless of you occupying my house, and I'm like, yes, because I don't have the military wherewithal to challenge you. When war breaks out and I find that this guy's kicking your butt, guess what happens? I'm going to join his side and kick your butt with him. I mean, that's common sense. You understand? Let's see. It says the only reasonable solution to their situation would be contacting Chinese on the intelligence level, promising to kick the U.S. bases out from Japan as a proof of goodwill during negotiations with China. Hey, before I go on to this other part and then close out, I'm gonna address that. This was about, I don't know how long it was. Maybe it was 8 years ago. Maybe it was 10 years ago, something like that. On RT, they were interviewing a former Japanese prime minister. And he said that really Japan and China has no quorum with each other, and that they can talk out their differences and come to a reasonable conclusion on the Diaoyu Islands, right? And everything else. He said, but every time they make moves for that, the United States intervened. And right when Japan was right at the apex of making a solid agreement, peace agreement with China, the United States came and they sent the intelligence head and the military chiefs to talk to the Japanese government and told them that if they dared make peace with China outside of the U.S. acceptance of it, then they would not only have 75% of Okinawa, but they would seize of Okinawa and the surrounding prefecture. This is what he said on RT. And I've been looking for that video, but it's hard. But Google's, got rid of, when they banned RT, they got rid of all those videos. But a Japanese prime minister a former prime minister was being interviewed, and that's what he said. For real. So, yeah, I'm telling you, Exp.2. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name. My mouth is dry. I've been talking for over almost 2 hours, and I've been trying to give the news and stuff. Charge it to my head and not to my heart. No means of disrespect, okay? But listen, let's go to something. Where is it at? I'm trying to find what I just had. Now, the reason I came to this point right here is because I was listening to Janet Yellen, right? And I was listening to the pundits talk about the precarious situation that the United States now finds itself in. And as I was listening, I was just flipping through the tables that I have on my computer, and I see on Press TV it says Republicans pass debt ceiling hike as U.S. creeps towards financial calamity. Now, that is it, and I didn't click on it, so now I'm going to click on it. And so it says this right here. I'm not going to read this whole thing. No, I'm not going to read that whole thing, but I'm going to read a little bit of it, and we'll analyze it, and then we'll bring the show to a close, okay? Because it's very important, because it goes hand in hand with what we're saying. And once again, thank you in the Cash App. Thank you so much. But let's go. It says the U.S. House of Representatives on Wednesday narrowly passed a bill to raise the government's $31.4 trillion debt ceiling, defying Democratic President Joe Biden by attaching sweeping spending cuts for the next decade. Now stop right there. Now they passed it, and they have spending cuts in it, right? This is to cater to their base. Now I'm neither Republican or Democrat, so I don't care either way. But I call it like it is. I call it like it is. Okay. Now, let us look at something. Let us go to a definition. Debt ceiling. Okay. Just put meaning of debt ceiling in the Google search engine. I did that while I was talking to you. And it says an upper limit set on the amount of money that a government may borrow. Now, if this is the case, why is it that every time the government gets ready to reach the debt limit, they up it? That's not a limit. That's a facade. Why even have the debt limit if you are not limited by the debt? Those are two. Listen, you cannot have a debt limit and yet not be constrained by the debt that you continually make. It sounds good, but you continue to borrow and spend and borrow and spend and borrow. And you're doing it in a time where you produce nothing but war material that does not work, in dollars that no one wants, and movies that people are starting to turn against. So what you're doing is borrowing against the future of America. Again, this is what I keep telling you guys. A lot of you don't understand what is going on. Yeah, for boosting the army, yeah, but it's more. But check this out. And you're right. You're right, ex-Papushka. You're right about that. That's part of it right there. Just check this out when we come to it. Now, if I have think about this. If I have $600, I'm just going to give you just a little small number that we can deal with it a little better. Say, for instance, I make $600 a month, and I have a spending limit of $600 a month, and my rent is $50, or my mortgage is $50, and my car payment is $50, and blah, 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 and everything adds up to under $600. Then I don't have to up my spending limit or borrow more because I am living within my means of what I make. But now listen, if I go over my spending limit or up the debt ceiling, guess what happens? I'm borrowing against the security and livelihood of my family. Why? Because I have no means to pay it back. And at some point, all my assets can be stripped from me because I've been living above my means. So if every time I get to a limit, I overspend, that means I have to borrow. Now, check this out. And I'm borrowing from future generations. And guess what else I'm doing? I'm borrowing from everybody in the city that I have fought, demonized, gossiped against, and destabilized their households. That's what I'm doing. I'm borrowing against all the people that I have caused trouble with. How long do you think that can go on? And now some people are saying, hey, listen, I'm going to need a few of those assets in your house. No, you can't get the assets. So I pull out my pistol and I hold it to their head. And at the same time, I go back to them the next day after I pull the gun out on them. And this is for YouTube and the algorithm. This is an analogy. This is not my views, okay? And I turn around the next morning and come to you and say, hey, I need to borrow $100 more. Now, I just pulled a pistol out on you yesterday for you asking for some of the money back that I borrowed. How long can that go on? Well, this is exactly what the United States government is doing. They don't know how to live within their means. Remember, this is a service economy. This is not a productive economy. They don't manufacture many things. So this is a service economy, right? Fast food, blah, 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 hotels, blah, 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 like that, right? So I have no tangible or stable commodity or assets that I can turn to and use as collateral against my borrowing. So what I'm doing, I'm telling you, you're either going to give it to me or I'm going to destabilize you. Either you're going to give it to me or I'm going to go over in your cousin's house and I'm going to take the TV and sell it. And I'm going to go in your uncle's house and I'm going to take the bike and sell it. And I'm going to go in your grandmother's house and I'm going to take everything in there and sell it. This is what they're doing. They're galloping around the world on all kinds of escapades, taking the gold. Because that's the first thing they do. When they went into Libya, they took the Libyan currency reserves. France, England, the United States, they stole all of the currency reserves. And they stole the $350 billion in gold that the West was holding. It disappeared. What did they do to Germany? Their own ally. When Germany tried to get back its gold, we'll give you a ton. Hey, but I didn't give you a ton. I gave you 20,000 tons. I gave you 4,000 tons. What you mean you're gonna give me a ton? And it's gonna take. This is Britain in the United States, and it's gonna take 20 years for you to repatriate my gold that I put in your banks. The hell you mean? Then you go to Venezuela, the United States and Great Britain. We can't give you your gold. Venezuela literally had to go and embarrass them to get some of their gold back. What did they do when they went into Ukraine after the coup of the Maidan? The first thing was a covert operation, and they went in there and seized the gold. Huh? So they pillage, rob, and steal under the guise of what? Humanitarian relief, democracy, right? Human rights. And then they privatize everything that's state-owned so that the corporations of the West can go in and pillage the people and rob them. In Libya, water was free. They paid for it. Power, electricity was free. They paid for it. Education was free. They're forced to pay for it. All of this stuff that was free under the so-called dictatorship, when America and the West brought democracy, the people have to pay for it. And they don't even get a share of the revenue of the oil and gas that was sold in Libya, as they did under the so-called dictator. This is parasitic. This cannot go on in perpetuity. This is what I'm saying. So why have a debt ceiling if every time you approach it, you raise it up? That is not constraining debt. That is ignoring reality. Because you have to lean on everybody else. And when they don't do it, you get mad. And you become a consequence, and they become a consequence of your anger. Is that not what goes on? Sure it is. Sure it is. But I just wanted to let you know that. And I just wanted to talk to you again. And maybe we'll do one in the morning or tomorrow evening or something like that. I'm getting a signal from a family. It's time for us to have a little family gathering and stuff in the house. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining. I'd like to thank the Cash App. I'd like to thank everyone for giving me an ear and a little bit of your time. Know that I love you if you love truth, but God will always love you best. Why? Because he is the all-knowing, true, and living God. So put your trust and faith in him, and he'll never fail you. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Everybody, thank you in the chat. Deuces. I love you.